Your husband is lying to you. He has another family. He took out a $30 million life insurance policy on you. And by Friday, he plans to sell your mother's estate. Smile, April. He's looking at us.
Your husband is lying to you. The voice was a dark, velvet whisper against April's ear, carrying the faint, sharp scent of expensive tobacco and gunpowder. April Wallace didn't flinch. She kept her eyes fixed on the glittering chandeliers of the Gala, the emerald silk of her gown perfectly still. The man standing impossibly close behind her didn't move away. Young Min Sik. She knew his face from the hushed, terrified whispers of the financial district, a Korean syndicate boss who operated in the shadows of Seoul and New York. He leaned in a fraction of an inch closer, the swirling black ink of his neck tattoo brushing the edge of his crisp white collar. He has another family, Min Sik murmured, his voice so calm it chilled her blood. He took out a $30 million life insurance policy on you yesterday morning, and by Friday, he plans to sell your mother's estate. Smile, April. He's looking at us. April's heart slammed against her ribs like a trapped bird, but 10 years of building her own empire had taught her how to wear a mask. She let out a soft, melodic laugh, tilting her head as if the most dangerous man in the city had just told her a charming joke. Across the ballroom, standing near the champagne tower, her husband of 4 years, David, smiled back at her. It was the same warm, boyish smile that had convinced her to merge their lives, their accounts, as their futures. But looking at him now, through the lens of Young Min Sik's 5 whispered sentences, the smile looked entirely different. It didn't look like love. It looked like an appraisal. "Why are you telling me this?" April asked, keeping her lips parted in a flawless, practiced smile, never breaking eye contact with her husband across the room. "Because David owes my organization a very large sum of money," Min Sik replied smoothly, stepping back just enough to create the illusion of a polite social interaction. "Money he plans to pay back using your life insurance payout. I do not accept blood money from cowards, and I thought a woman who built a logistics empire from the ground up deserved the chance to burn him to the ground herself." He slipped a sleek black keycard into the pocket of her gown. "The Continental, room 812, midnight. Don't drink anything he gives you tonight." And just like that, Min Sik vanished into the crowd, leaving April standing in the golden light, entirely alone with a ghost she used to call her husband. Hello, family. Welcome back to Afro K Mafia Diary. Before we dive into today's explosive story, I want to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city and country in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a story. Now, let's get into it. The car moved silently through the dark city streets. April sat frozen in the soft leather seat. David sat next to her, humming a happy tune. He reached over and rubbed her arm. His warm touch made April feel completely sick. "You look tired, beautiful," David said with a perfect fake smile. He handed her a water bottle. "Drink this. You will feel better." April stared at the clear liquid. Min Sik's cold warning screamed in her mind. "Do not drink anything he hands you." Her hands shook. She pretended to take a sip, then hid the bottle. At home, April quickly got into bed and closed her eyes tightly. She controlled her breathing, faking a deep sleep. For one terrifying hour, David just stood in the dark, watching her from the doorway. Finally, he walked down the hall. April silently slipped out from under the blankets. She grabbed the black keycard and slowly opened the bedroom door. Suddenly, a loud floorboard creaked under her foot. Down the dark hall, David's heavy footsteps instantly stopped. Would he catch her leaving? April slipped into room 812 at midnight. The room was dark, except for one lamp on a glass table. Young Min Sik stood by the window, looking at the city lights. He turned and pointed to a red book on the table. April walked over. Her heart beat hard against her ribs. She opened the heavy cover. Inside were copies of her life insurance papers. The payout amount was circled in thick black ink, $30 million. Next to those papers were pages of casino records and wire transfers. The numbers were huge. Min Sik stepped closer. His voice was low and steady in the quiet room. "He did not cheat just to hurt you, April. He cheated because he is desperate. He pointed to the final number at the bottom of the page. Your husband owes my people $15 million. He lost it all in illegal card games over the last 2 years. April stared at the red ink. If David owed $15 million, why was the insurance for 30? What was the rest of the money for? Before April could process the massive debt, Minsik pulled a brown folder from his jacket. He slid it across the cold glass table until it touched her hands. Open it, he commanded softly. April lifted the cover, and the breath left her lungs entirely. Inside were dozens of glossy photographs. In the first picture, David was laughing in a sunny park. A blonde woman leaned against his shoulder, and a little boy, maybe 3 years old, sat happily on his shoulders. The boy had David's exact smile. More pictures followed in a sick blur. David holding the boy at a birthday party. David kissing the woman on the steps of a massive house. The dates showed this hidden life had lasted over 4 years. Minsik watched her carefully. He bought them that mansion 6 months ago, he whispered. April stared at the happy faces as panic gripped her. She controlled all the company finances and checked the bank accounts every single day. How did David fund a second life without her ever noticing a single missing penny? The bright morning sun felt like a cruel joke. April stood in the kitchen doorway, watching her husband hum a cheerful tune. David stood by the counter, carefully pouring her favorite dark roast coffee. He looked so normal and loving. Morning, beautiful. David smiled warmly, handing her the steaming mug. I made it exactly how you like. April forced her hands to stay perfectly still as she took the cup. She smiled back, but her heart hammered wildly. Minsik's cold warning from the hotel room echoed in her mind. Do not eat or drink anything he hands you. April brought the mug to her lips, pretending to take a sip, but let the hot liquid slide safely onto a napkin. She watched David's eyes. He was waiting for her to swallow. Minsik's team had already tested the leftover coffee grounds in the trash. The terrible secret was confirmed. The coffee was laced with a slow-acting muscle relaxant, all meant to make her upcoming accident look entirely natural. If she drank it, she would be completely helpless. What was David planning today? April parked her car 2 blocks away from the bank. She wore dark glasses and walked quickly. Inside, the grand marble building felt freezing. She asked to see Mr. Vance, her private banker for 10 years. When she sat down, he did not smile. He looked at her with a strange, cold expression. Mrs. Wallace, I am surprised to see you, he said stiffly. Yes, April felt a sudden chill in her chest. She asked to freeze the main company accounts immediately. Mr. Vance frowned and crossed his arms. I cannot do that, he replied slowly. You no longer have the authority. April's heart skipped a beat. She built this logistics empire from nothing. What do you mean? She asked, her voice shaking slightly. Mr. Vance slid a thick stack of papers across his wooden desk. He tapped the bottom line. According to these documents, you transferred all your voting rights and financial control to David yesterday. April stared at the blue ink. It was a perfect copy of her signature. Who helped David forge these legal papers so flawlessly? April had no other choice left. That evening, she drove down to the exact address Minsik had given her. It was a dark, hidden nightclub deep in the city's underground district. Heavy steel doors opened into a room filled with glowing monitors and quiet, dangerous men. Minsik sat in a dark leather chair at the back, calmly watching a wall of screens. He did not look surprised to see her shaking hands. April told him about the bank and the fake signature. I need your cyber team, she pleaded. I need to know exactly where my money went today. Minsik nodded to a young man typing fast at a computer. Code flashed across the big screen in green light. Suddenly, the hacker paused. He turned around, his face completely pale. Boss, the hacker whispered nervously, the stolen money was routed through our own hidden accounts. Minsik stood up slowly. The room grew dead silent. He stared at the screen, his dark eyes turning furious. The terrible secret was undeniable. Minsik's trusted second-in-command was secretly helping David launder the millions. The dark basement room felt like a dangerous trap. Minsik stood like a statue staring at the glowing computer screens. His own trusted man had betrayed him to help David steal the money. Minsik finally turned to face April. His dark eyes were totally cold and serious. "I will freeze your bank accounts before morning," he said softly, "and I will provide the heavy protection you need to survive this week." April let out a long breath she had been holding, but Minsik held up one hand to stop her relief. "However, my help is never free," he continued. He walked slowly around her leather chair. Your husband stole $15 million from my family. If I save your life and your business, you must pay his debt." April froze in fear. If she paid that huge amount, she might lose the entire empire she built from nothing. "I want 50% ownership of your company," Minsik demanded quietly. April stared into his dangerous eyes. What else would she have to sacrifice to survive this deadly nightmare? 2 nights later, April hosted a fancy dinner party in her beautiful home. She wore a stunning red dress and smiled perfectly. No one could tell she was secretly terrified. David stood by the front door, happily greeting their wealthy guests. Suddenly, April felt her blood turn to solid ice. A new business client walked in, laughing loudly. Beside him stood a very familiar blonde woman. It was the exact woman from Minzik's hidden photographs. David's secret second family was standing right inside her living room. David's face turned completely pale for a second. But he quickly forced a fake smile. The client proudly introduced the blonde woman as his younger sister, Chloe. April walked forward smoothly and kindly shook Chloe's hand. "It is so nice to meet you," April said sweetly. Chloe smiled back, looking around the giant, expensive house. "David told me he lived alone," Chloe said with a very confused look. "Are you his sister?" April's heart pounded loudly in her chest. The terrible secret was suddenly crystal clear. This blonde woman had absolutely no idea that David was already married. April followed the blonde woman, Chloe, down the quiet hallway. As Chloe washed her hands in the marble powder room, April locked the heavy wooden door behind them with a soft click. Chloe jumped, looking up at the large mirror with wide eyes. April smiled a sharp, cold smile. "David is a very busy man," April said smoothly. "He travels so much for work." Chloe nodded slowly, looking confused. "Yes, he tells me that all the time." April stepped closer, smelling Chloe's cheap perfume. She realized she held all the power in this tiny room. She could destroy David right now by screaming the truth. But Minsik's dark warning echoed in her head. She needed a weapon, not a messy fight. "He is lucky to have a kind sister like you to help him," April lied perfectly. Chloe smiled, clearly relieved. "Actually, we are engaged," Chloe whispered happily, flashing a small diamond ring. April's blood turned to pure ice. How could she use this foolish, innocent girl as a pawn in her deadly game? The next afternoon, David left for a fake business trip. Minsik's silent men moved through April's house like shadows. They quickly hid tiny cameras inside smoke detectors and bookshelves. April watched from the kitchen, feeling like a stranger in her own home. She had to know exactly what David did when she was not looking. That night, she sat in the dark guest bedroom with a small tablet. The screen showed a clear, glowing video of David walking into his private office. April held her breath tightly. David stood perfectly still in front of a tall mirror. Slowly, he buried his face in his hands. When he looked up, his eyes were red and wet with perfect fake tears. "I just do not know how she lost control of the car," David sobbed to the empty room. He wiped his eyes, suddenly stopped crying, and smiled a cold, evil smile. He was practicing his performance for the police. The terrible secret was finally caught on tape. He planned to murder her this weekend. April sat in her dark office at 2 a.m. Her fingers flew across the computer keyboard. David thought he was smart, but April built the company's financial system herself. She found his hidden offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands quickly. He had transferred over $12 million in the last 3 months alone. With a few highly complex security codes, April began moving the money back. She hid the secret transfers behind a maze of fake corporate purchases. By dawn, David's secret accounts held exactly $0. April smiled, her eyes cold and hard in the computer light. She had taken back her entire fortune, but a sudden beep from her phone ruined the silence. It was an alert from David's private accountant. Someone had logged into the system. April froze, her hand hovering over the mouse. The money was safe, but the digital alarm was ringing. If David's accountant checked the final numbers tomorrow morning, the whole plan would explode. Would David realize his stolen millions were completely gone before the deadly Friday deadline? The front door unlocked loudly. April gasped in the dark hallway. David was supposed to be gone until tomorrow. Suddenly, Minsik grabbed her arm and pulled her into the narrow coat closet just as David stepped inside the house. The closet was pitch black and smelled of winter coats. April was pressed flat against Minsik's chest. She could feel his heart beating, slow and steady. His strong hand covered her mouth gently so she wouldn't make a sound. David's heavy footsteps echoed on the floorboards, moving closer. April trembled, but Minsik's calm presence made her feel strangely safe. When David finally walked upstairs, Minsik slowly lowered his hand. He looked down at her in the dark. "You did not panic," he whispered softly. "I knew you wouldn't. I have been watching how you handle your enemies for 2 years." April stared up at him, shocked by his deep words. He had known her long before the terrible night at the gala. Why was this dangerous mafia boss secretly guarding a married businesswoman from the shadows? Thursday morning felt heavy and wrong. April's trusted driver texted her at 7, saying he had terrible food poisoning. As she drank her tea, David walked into the kitchen jingling a set of silver keys. He smiled that perfect, deadly smile. "Since your driver is sick, you should take the vintage Porsche today," David suggested smoothly. "It is a beautiful day for a drive in the hills." April's blood ran completely cold. The road to her office was full of steep, dangerous cliffs. She took the keys with a forced smile. "Thank you, darling," she said sweetly. She walked out to the garage, staring at the shiny black sports car. The engine purred like a trapped monster. She knew David wanted her dead by Friday. Was this his final lethal trap? Or was he simply playing a cruel psychological game to see if she suspected him? If she refused to drive the car, David would know she was onto his plan. But if she got inside, she might never come out alive. April drove the Porsche exactly 3 blocks before a black van suddenly blocked the narrow street. 2 men in dark suits stepped out quickly. April's heart pounded. But she recognized Minsik's personal guards. One guard opened her door and practically pulled her out. "Get in the van, Mrs. Wallace," he ordered sharply. The second guard slid under the Porsche with a bright flashlight. Seconds later, he rolled out, holding a thick, greasy wire. It was cut clean through. "The brake lines are completely gone," the guard reported. April felt sick to her stomach. If she had reached the hills, she would have crashed over the steep edge. Inside the dark van, Minsik sat waiting. He tossed a heavy file onto the seat next to her. "Your husband did not cut those lines himself," Minsik said darkly. "He is far too cowardly." April opened the file and saw a picture of a man with a scarred face. The terrifying secret was finally out. David had hired a ruthless professional hitman for backup. April stared at the awful photo of the hitman. If the killer failed today, David would just try again tomorrow. "I have to die," April whispered quietly in the dark van. Minsik looked at her with sharp, focused eyes. "We have to make David believe his evil plan actually worked," she explained. "We need to fake the terrible car crash." It was the only way to buy enough time to trap David legally and financially. Minsik nodded slowly, a dangerous smile touching his lips. He understood her brilliant mind perfectly, but the police would have to find a ruined car at the bottom of the rocky cliff. They would expect to find a body inside the burning metal. April looked down at her shaking hands. She could not just push an empty car over the steep edge. The hitman was probably watching the mountain roads right now. They needed someone who looked exactly like her. How could they stage a fiery, believable crash right in front of the hitman without April actually being inside the car? The phone rang loudly in the quiet, empty house. David answered with a perfectly practiced, shaking voice. The police officer on the line told him the terrible news. His wife's black Porsche had gone over a steep cliff, bursting into bright flames at the rocky bottom. David forced out a loud, fake sob and hung up the phone. A cold, cruel smile spread across his face. April sat safely in Minsick's dark surveillance van, listening to David through the hidden cameras. She felt completely sick, watching him celebrate her fiery death. Immediately, David pulled out a secret burner phone and dialed a familiar number. "Chloe, it is done," David whispered happily to his blonde mistress. "Pack your bags and get the boy ready right now." April's eyes went wide with sudden panic. "We are leaving the country tomorrow morning," David told the woman. "Tomorrow morning?" April looked at Minsick in horror. The deadly Friday deadline was a lie. David was fleeing with her stolen millions in less than 24 hours. Could they stop him in time? Again, there was no time left to wait. Minsick ordered his driver to speed directly to his secure glass penthouse high above the city. The giant room was filled with moonlight and quiet panic. April immediately opened her laptop on his massive dining table. She had to completely trap David legally before the sun came up. Minsick paced behind her like a caged tiger, making rapid phone calls to his best lawyers in the dark. They had to freeze the fake life insurance payout, lock down the airports, and expose David's massive fraud all at once. April typed furiously until her fingers ached. Every second felt like a ticking bomb. If they made one single mistake, David would escape with her entire life's work. Minsick brought her a glass of cold water, his dark eyes watching her screen closely. "He thinks he has already won," Minsick whispered into the quiet room. "Show him he is wrong." But the legal web was deeply tangled. Could April untangle the massive financial trap in less than 12 hours? By 3 a.m, the heavy silence of the penthouse pressed down on them. April rubbed her tired, burning eyes. She looked up and saw Minsick sitting completely still in a leather chair. He had unbuttoned his crisp white collar, revealing the dark, swirling dragon tattoo on his neck. He noticed her staring at the thick ink. "It is not just for show," Minsick said softly. His voice held a deep, old sadness. He leaned forward into the pale moonlight. "When I first built my empire, I trusted someone blindly, just like you did." April listened closely, her heart aching at his gentle tone. "He wanted my power, so he tried to cut my throat in my sleep," Minsick whispered. He touched the edge of the black dragon. "The ink covers the ugly scar he left behind." April felt a sudden chill run down her spine. The terrible secret hung heavy in the dark air. The last person who betrayed this dangerous, powerful mafia boss was his own trusted brother. The morning sun rose, bright and cold. David walked into the grand marble bank wearing a sharp black suit. He wiped a fake tear from his eye as he sat down in Mr. Vance's fancy office. "It is a terrible tragedy," David sighed, handing over the fake death certificate. "But April would want me to take care of the company now. Please transfer her entire fortune to my private offshore account." "Mr." Vance nodded politely and typed the secret codes into his computer. Suddenly, the banker frowned. He typed the numbers again, his face turning completely pale. "Mr. Wallace, there seems to be a huge problem," Mr. Vance said nervously. David leaned forward, a dark, angry look flashing in his eyes. "What is wrong?" David demanded sharply. "The accounts are completely empty," the banker whispered. "Why, every single dollar was moved to a secure Cayman trust last night." David stared at the blank screen in absolute horror. What would the desperate, greedy man do now that his stolen millions were completely gone? While David panicked inside the bank, Minsick's men worked quickly in the shadows. They tracked the professional killer to a dirty, hidden motel on the edge of the city. 2 strong guards dragged the bruised, angry hitman into the dark basement of Minsick's nightclub. April stood safely behind Minsick as they searched the killer's heavy leather jacket. Minsick pulled out a folded, thick yellow paper. He read the heavy black text, and his jaw locked in pure anger. He handed the old paper back to April without saying a word. April's hands shook violently as she unfolded the document. It was not a bag of stolen cash. It was the original legal deed to her beloved mother's old country estate. The terrible secret finally hit her like a physical blow. And David did not pay the ruthless killer with his own money. He had traded her beautiful childhood home to pay for her violent murder. April closed her eyes, letting the sadness quickly turn into burning rage. She was ready to destroy him. The church was filled with white roses and soft, sad music. David stood at the front, wearing an expensive black suit and wiping a perfectly fake tear from his cheek. Hundreds of wealthy business leaders filled the wooden pews, whispering about the terrible, a fiery car crash. David stepped up to the microphone, his voice shaking just the right amount. "My beautiful wife was my entire world," he lied smoothly to the crowd. He looked down, pretending to be overcome with deep sorrow. But near the heavy wooden doors, a strange shadow sat perfectly still. In the very last row, away from the crying guests, a single woman sat alone. She wore a sharp, elegant black dress and a thick, dark veil covering her face completely. She did not cry. She did not move. She simply watched David's cruel performance with cold, focused eyes. As David spoke about inheriting her beloved company, the mysterious woman slowly reached into her dark purse. Who was hiding beneath that heavy black veil? David wiped his eyes and prepared to finish his fake, loving speech. Suddenly, the sharp click of high heels echoed against the marble floor. The crowd turned around in shock. The woman in the back row stood up and slowly pulled back her dark veil. Several people gasped out loud. David dropped his microphone, his face turning completely white. April Wallace walked down the center aisle looking perfectly alive and extremely dangerous. "I am sorry to interrupt my own funeral," April said clearly, her voice echoing through the silent, terrified room. She did not look like a victim. She looked like a powerful queen. She walked right up to the wooden podium and stood next to her freezing husband. David was shaking with total fear. April lifted a thick stack of papers high into the air. The terrible secret was finally exposed to everyone. She held the legal bank records, the fake signatures, and the Cayman Island transfers. She had the hard proof to destroy him completely. David desperately tried to save his ruined plan. He forced a wild, crazy smile and reached out his shaking hands. "It is a miracle!" David shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "My sweet wife has somehow survived the terrible crash." April simply stepped back, refusing to let him touch her. She pulled a small black remote from her pocket and pressed one button. Suddenly, the church speakers stopped playing sad music. Instead, David's own voice echoed loudly through the entire room. "I just do not know how she lost control of the car," the recording played. Then, a dark, cruel laugh followed. The wealthy crowd gasped in absolute horror. Everyone finally heard the evil truth. They heard David practicing his fake tears and plotting his quick escape with his secret mistress. The church erupted into loud whispers and angry shouts. David looked around like a trapped, desperate animal. His fake smile vanished entirely, replaced by pure, burning anger. Would David become violently dangerous right in front of high society? Before David could move toward April, the heavy church doors slammed open with a loud crash. The angry whispers of the crowd stopped instantly. A tall, scary man with a deep scar across his chin marched down the aisle. It was Minsick's trusted lieutenant, the traitor who helped steal the money. His eyes were wild and desperate. The terrible secret was finally out in the open. The rogue lieutenant had not come alone. 4 large men marched closely behind him, quickly pulling heavy silver guns from their dark jackets. They locked the church doors, trapping all the wealthy guests inside. "Nobody moves!" the lieutenant yelled, pointing his weapon directly at the stage. He did not care about David or the fake funeral anymore. He only cared about his missing millions. He knew April was the only person who could unlock the frozen Cayman bank accounts. He slowly raised his gun, aiming it right at April's chest. Who could possibly stop this deadly armed crew? The crowd screamed and dropped to the floor in pure terror. But April did not run. Suddenly, a dark shadow stepped smoothly from behind the tall marble pillars. Young Min-sik moved faster than lightning. He pushed April safely behind his broad shoulders just as the traitor yelled a harsh command. Min-sik's own loyal guards quickly poured out from the side rooms, trapping the rogue crew in a tense, deadly circle. Min-sik stood perfectly calm in his dark suit, staring down the frightened lieutenant. "You made a very bad choice," Min-sik said softly, his voice cutting through the panic. The traitor's hand shook violently as he held his gun. One wrong move would start a massive, bloody shootout right inside the crowded church. Min-sik had to end this fast, but if the guns fired, the city police would rush in and uncover Min-sik's entire secret mafia world. Could the dangerous boss secure the chaotic room without destroying his own hidden criminal empire? April stepped out from behind Min-sik's broad back. She did not need dangerous guns or bloody bullets to win this war. As the church doors rattled loudly, a completely different group of men walked in. They were not wearing dark suits. They wore dark blue FBI windbreakers. The fierce federal agents surrounded David instantly. He screamed in pure panic as cold steel handcuffs snapped tightly around his wrists. April walked closely to him, holding a small brown folder. "I did not just take my money back," she whispered sharply in his ear. "I left a fake trail of stolen money pointing right at your secret offshore accounts." The terrible secret was finally clear to David. He was not just broke, he was trapped. She had framed him so flawlessly with the IRS that he would spend the next 40 years rotting in a federal prison. As the agents dragged David away, kicking and screaming, April turned around. The rogue lieutenant still held his gun. Would Min-sik let the traitor walk away alive? A week later, the loud courtroom was completely packed. David sat looking pale and terrified in his bright orange prison suit. The heavy wooden doors opened, and Chloe, the blonde mistress, walked slowly to the witness stand. She looked down at her shaking hands. To save herself from going to jail, Chloe agreed to tell the judge everything. She cried as she explained David's lies and the fake business trips. Her testimony locked David in a cold cell forever. After the trial, April found Chloe crying on the hard marble steps outside. The young woman held her small, innocent boy tightly. Chloe had absolutely no money left since the FBI took the giant mansion. April stood over her, looking down with cold, calculating eyes. This woman had slept in a bed bought with April's stolen money. April held the absolute power to leave them homeless on the street. She reached into her expensive leather purse and pulled out a thick white envelope. Would the angry queen finally show mercy to the broken pawn? The huge, empty house felt like a quiet museum. April poured a glass of red wine and stood by the large living room window. The war was completely over. David was locked away, and she had safely hidden Chloe and the boy in a small, quiet apartment far away. April was finally the untouchable master of her massive logistics empire. But the victory felt strangely cold. She walked into the dark guest bedroom where Min-sik's men had set up the hidden cameras. The room was completely empty. The terrible secret settled heavily in her chest. Young Min-sik had vanished. To protect her from the dangerous police investigation, he took his loyal men and left the city in the middle of the night. He left absolutely no phone number, no message, and no trace behind. April touched the cold glass of the window, looking out at the dark, lonely street. Had the terrifying Mafia boss simply used her to catch his traitor, or did he leave to keep her safe? 6 long months passed slowly. The bright summer sun warmed the city, but April's heart felt frozen. Her business was booming bigger than ever before. She sat at the head of the giant boardroom table, an untouchable queen wearing a sharp white suit. The wealthy men who used to ignore her now bowed their heads with deep respect. April had everything she ever wanted. Yet, every time a tall shadow crossed the busy street, she stopped and held her breath. She missed the dark, quiet man who made her feel powerful and safe. She missed the sharp smell of sandalwood and the heavy, secret tattoo on his neck. Late at night, she stared at the blank screen of her phone, hoping for a single message from the dangerous underground world. But the screen remained completely black. The painful question echoed loudly in her empty, quiet house. Had Young Min Sik truly forgotten the strong woman he saved, leaving her behind in the bright light for good? The winter gala was bright, loud, and full of wealthy people. April stood near the giant crystal chandelier, wearing a stunning black gown. She did not hide in the corners anymore. She owned the entire room. People watched her with a mix of deep fear and absolute respect. Suddenly, the soft music seemed to fade away. A familiar cold gravity dropped the temperature in the warm air. A tall man in a dark navy suit stepped silently behind her. April smelled the sharp, rich scent of sandalwood. A dark velvet voice whispered softly against her ear, sending wild shivers down her spine. "You look much better in black," Young Min Sik murmured smoothly. This time April did not freeze in terror. She did not fake a polite smile to hide her fear. The beautiful queen turned around slowly, her eyes flashing with pure fire. She smiled a real, brilliant smile. Mace grabbed the dangerous Mafia boss by his crisp white collar and boldly pulled him into the bright light. Sometimes the darkest betrayal is just the universe forcing you to open your eyes. April thought she was living a perfect life, but she was trapped in a dangerous lie. The lesson here is simple but powerful. Never shrink yourself to fit into someone else's comfort zone. When someone shows you who they truly are, believe them immediately. Your brilliance and strength are not flaws to be hidden. The right partner will never ask you to put out your fire or make yourself smaller. Instead, they will stand right beside you and help you conquer the world. If April's journey from a targeted wife to an untouchable queen inspired you, please hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to remember their own power. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an exciting story. We want to hear from you. Let us know in the comments below. What was your absolute favorite moment in April and Min Sik's story? Thanks for watching.